Captain's Log Supplemental.
Hey Jeremy, you know those race cars you're busy building?
Yeah, I do.
You,
I
you,
got one
you
that I'm looking at every day.
you know what I don't see you working on?
You don't see me working on the amazing Sentinel system yet.
That's true. It would take all of 10 minutes for you to have one.
And it's very quick and easy to install.
It is. It is. And we could watch you when we are not at the race with you and see how you're doing. And then we can call you up when you get out of the car and tell you everything you did wrong.
And I love that because so many years I've been driving and not been able to see what I'm doing.
I know.
And now we can.
I know. You know what I'd like to do with the video? My most favorite thing is I take the video and I load it on YouTube and then I send it to my coach and say, look at 26 minutes and 17 seconds. Look at this one lap and tell me what I can do better. And every single time, you know what they say?
Everything.
Exactly. Precisely. So with the Sentinel system, you get instantaneous feedback plus useful feedback that unfortunately is accurate for my driving.
I think it's accurate for all of our driving.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's probably true. Yep. But you need to get one in your car, sir.
Yes, I do. And with the discount code that you're going to tell everybody, they can save 10% on this awesome system.
Yep. Trouble free. I haven't had an issue getting video every time we've gone out with the Sentinel. It's always worked. Can't say the same for some of the other systems we've tried. So I don't know. It's on the podcast notes down there. Don't do it while you're driving, though. We like to have our listeners live. It's good.
From the great halls of their house, there are assembled three who hope to one day be the world's greatest driving heroes. Created from the cosmic legends of the universe comes our team captain, the Vision, Bill Fisher, and their soon-to-be Wonder Woman, Vicky Fisher, and our Captain Marvel and head flight trainee, Jennifer Skripchuk. Their mission: to fight injustice, share what is right and wrong, to get you out of your house and come out racing with them and serve all mankind. They are the Garage Heroes in Training Team.
Welcome to the Garage Heroes in Training podcast. I'm going to be the host for this episode. My name is Bill. We have a guest. We have a guest that we have been pursuing for many, many moons. First became particularly aware of him several years ago when he was a guest on Ross Bentley's Speed Seekers podcast. Knew about him before that, but then once I heard him talking to Ross, had to have him on there. And then through no fault of his and strictly a fault of mine, I never actually closed the loop. So he had little to know that he was one of our original bucket list guests for the podcast. But you may know him as Trailbreak Matt. You may know him from his YouTube channel, Trailbreak Data. But his real name is Matt Romanowski. Welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thanks. That's quite the intro. I have a lot to live up to here.
Don't worry. Your answers will far exceed the quality of my questions. So just in case people aren't familiar, there's so many people in racing, and the one thing we found is that sometimes you'll know somebody by face, and then you'll know somebody through the internet, and you'll never realize that they're the exact same people. So just in case they aren't familiar and don't have everything locked in, could you kind of give yourself a background with what you've been doing with racing and everything?
Oh, man. So it's kind of a loaded question, a little bit long, but I'll try to make it short.
We have plenty of tape in the podcast machine, so we're good.
My dad started in the automotive industry in probably the 60s, early 70s, and he worked at Keystone when they were brand new, and a lot of people know the Keystone name for the parts distributor. And then he got into other stuff, but the owner of Keystone, Joe Amato, was a big drag racer, and my dad always liked racing. So
I think he lives about 4 blocks that way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is he still in Exeter?
I think we were told that he lives in, I guess it's Clark Summit or Abington Township right now. So
yeah. So
somebody there who's named Amato, but
yeah,
we'll find him.
And then it's always funny because you're growing up and you don't always believe the stories from your parents and everything. And then now it was probably 10 or 15 years ago, and my dad and I are at a drag race standing at the top of the bleachers, and Joey runs up, he looks at my dad and goes, "Hey John, how you doing?" Like they didn't miss a beat. It was crazy.
Wow.
So I grew up going to the drag races, going to the local short track and all that, and it kind of ignited the passion in me. And then when I turned 18, my best friend had a 914 and he brought me to a Porsche Club autocross, and the hook was like really set.
Mhm.
So I had a Mitsubishi Eclipse then that I sold. I bought a junker and I had like 5 grand to go find a 914. And it took me a couple years through college and a bunch of trips and stories. And I got it and I started tracking it right away as I rebuilt it. And that car went through a progression of motors. And through the Porsche Club, I stopped at a friend's mechanic and he had a Formula Continental sitting
Mhm.
on the alignment rack. And I looked at it, I was like, it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And now I know it actually wasn't a great Continental. It was an 85 Reynard that wasn't their best car ever. Um, but I looked at it and I just said to the guy, I said, "Hey, that looks pretty cool. If you ever need help, I'd like to do it." And then I spent a ton of time working on that car and going to the races. And that's when I got into data. And that was around 2000. Um, and then kept driving and became a Porsche Club instructor and driving. And then when AIM came out with the first solos, one of the guys in the region was an AIM dealer. And he said, "Hey, I want to loan a bunch of these to the club. And do you want to take care of them for people?" And I think I learned more in a day using that solo than I had the previous 5 years. It was incredible.
Right.
Um, and then I started helping people with them. And I said, "This is stupid. You should like sell them too." So I became an AIM dealer and then more and more. Luckily, I'm not into like TV or pop culture. So when everybody else is watching TV, I'm usually staring at a computer, figuring out data stuff.
It's almost the same. I mean, some of the shows are pretty bad right now.
I can't even tell you because I'm like, I think I'm 4 years behind on my pop culture because I tell my wife something's new and she tells me it's old and I have no idea.
Well, with Garage Heroes and Heroes in there, we're kind of pop culture geeks on the comic book side, so that's about all we can keep up with because you kind of have to choose what you get into because time's a limited resource.
Yeah, but like your podcast, I can read the guests you've had, and those are all names I know. And then you show me movie stars or something, and I have no idea.
Well, I like to think of Ross Bentley as a movie star, but
He is the movie star to all of us, right? And then he's an interesting one, such a great guy. And then you meet him and you become friends with him. And then sometimes you have to like step back and you're like, "Holy cow, I'm friends with the guy who wrote the book."
yeah, yeah, many of the books.
Right.
It's like, okay, could you write another book? I mean, it's Tuesday. Aren't you due for another one on something that will save me hours and hours of figuring it out
Right.
on myself? So Miss Vicky was unable to attend. We're picking up another race car. Sorry. No, I guess not that sorry. But
Right. Sorry, not sorry.
yeah, exactly. Her favorite question and one that she gets very unhappy when I don't ask when she's not here is, do you have like a racing philosophy? It could be something you tell yourself when you're getting involved, or something you tell somebody else who's going to get involved, or something one of your students or anything like that.
Um, what would my racing philosophy be? I probably have a bunch of little ones.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one I got from Ross that really stuck with me is have fun
Yep.
because it's so easy to get engrossed in a project, engrossed at the track, and it becomes work and it's not fun. And then you have to step back and just go, "What the heck? Like, this is supposed to be fun." And sometimes that means walking away. Sometimes it means digging in more, right? But
Right.
have fun. Um, Another one I got from a guy I feel really lucky to work with is there's a coach, Thomas Merrill. I say coach. He's one of the best drivers I've ever seen and worked with, and one of the best coaches I've ever seen work.
It's a good combo.
If I told you the stories, it's not believable till you meet him and you see him in action, and then you realize he's really that guy. And one of the ones I got from Thomas is drive to the tire.
That's a good one.
And once you're on the track and you're doing something, unfortunately for me, like I keep waiting, and I was actually at the Detroit GP, and I heard Roger Penske's people were going to call me, but somehow it didn't come through. Um,
They had bad cell service that day.
right. And so sometimes it takes me like 3 days after the event to go like, you idiot, you didn't drive to the tire.
Mhm.
Versus a guy like Thomas or, those pro level guys. I know you've had Tom O'Gorman on a bunch. He probably thinks that thought like 8 times in the middle, like not even in the middle of the corner, from the turn in to halfway to the apex. He probably had that thought 13 times, right?
Yep.
For me, it happens once and it's like 4 days too late.
Always room for improvement, sir.
Yeah. And that's part of the fun, right? Is it's
Mhm.
that self challenge of doing it all.
Yeah. And
Those are probably my two answers that I give you right now.
well, you can come up with more next time you come on, so that'll be fine.
Madisms. I probably have to write a book.
The sad part is it would probably sell like a bajillion copies, and one on what you actually do for data analysis, just a small fraction of it.
Right.
But I don't care. Data matters. So
Right.
so we're either going to have a whole bunch of people who are like turning their volume up a little bit, or a whole bunch of people who eyes glaze over for the next, let's say, hour. But I think the thing that people misinterpret about telemetry and data is it's not the cop that reports that you're doing something bad. And
Right.
it can save you so much time to help you either eliminate bad habits or improve upon good habits. And Ross is famous for saying, the way to go faster is to do less bad things and more good things and not have time to do the bad things.
Yeah, I look at it. The first one I tell everyone that I do is it lets you make the next session,
Mm-hmm.
because all the data systems that link to the car, they'll give you like the voltage. So you know that your alternator is working, right? Because if that doesn't work, you don't get to drive.
Yep.
So I always look at it, the first thing, it just reports on the vehicle, and it makes you know that you don't have an oil pressure problem or a cooling problem, right? Like the thing's not going to blow up. So you get to make the session. Um, that's how I look at it first. And then I'm always the person that challenges myself more. So then I start to look at it and go like, yeah, where's my room for improvement? Not that I did something bad. And so many times the bad isn't actually bad. It's maybe the wrong skill at the wrong time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the perfect example, I was at the track Saturday because it rained Sunday and I don't have any rain tires at the end of the year here. And I was looking at somebody else's data and I realized I was overcharging turn three. Like I could carry 3 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour in, and he got me by 7 exiting.
Right.
And it wasn't that being able to charge a corner is like a bad thing, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just I did too much at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Which my personality, I always go for the bigger hammer.
I know. That way you take care of the bigger nail. It's fine.
Right. Um, right, but it was a roval, and I didn't use the big hammer when I got to the oval part, right? Like,
Yeah.
wrong tool, wrong spot. But it doesn't tell you that you did it wrong. It just shows you that you have a way to get better.
Mhm.
And if you approach it that way, I think then it's not restrictive. It's not like punitive. It's actually like enlightening, and it gives you new spots and new stuff you can try.
Right. Right. So we talked a little bit before the podcast. I don't know if we're going to add any into the post episode podcast, the Garage Heroes After Dark. But we talked a little bit about how we should structure this, because trying to summarize everything that the data collection and telemetry can do and the implications thereof, we would have a very, very long podcast, and I'm not sure we'd keep everybody involved with it. So we're kind of taking, I think we agreed to take the approach of this being kind of like the 101 or the 102. And then we will have another episode where we get a little bit deeper, and we can go as deep as our audience wants to go into the dark hole of telemetry. Um, so let's suppose we've got somebody who's relatively new to racing, and they're familiar with Race Hero, Race Monitor, and they have lap times. Let's call
Yep.
that the basis, maybe even Harry's lap timer, something, the first brand new. Hey, I found something. It's on my phone. We'll call
Yep.
that the 101. Is there even things that they can get from that, or should we go towards the next step of 202? Because basically you get lap times with that, maybe sector times.
Um, my philosophy until I get down, I think segment times are even like a few things deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't even really consider those 101 for a lot of people is if we say like my laps or just that basic lap time,
Right.
it's a super broad measure. So it's hard to do a lot with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd say on one hand, we want the fastest lap, but we can do that like in a good way or a bad way, right? Like we
Right.
can do it with a
For
ton of
sure.
risk and danger and or we can do it good. So there, I think consistency becomes an important thing. Like, can I replicate what I'm doing all the time?
Mm-hmm.
But after that, it gets kind of hard because it doesn't have a lot. If you get an app like Harry's Lap Timer, like the most basic one, or I think there's Track Addict and some other basic ones.
Right.
If you just have speed, now we have all the information that made up that lap time because the track distance is relatively the same. Like it varies, but it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty consistent. A 1.5 mile track is 1.5 miles. So the faster we can go on average, the lower the lap time.
Yes.
And then we can start to drill in and go like, okay, well, where's my lap time vary the most? Or where's my speed vary the most? And why did it do it, right? Like we can start peeling that onion apart and go, what did I do different?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you can get, man, I bet you can get 70% of a driver's performance just out of a speed trace.
So speed versus distance is your first go-to.
Yep. The first thing I do after I make sure my first thing I do on most of the cars I work with, I have vehicle health. So I make sure it's not overheating, that it
Mm-hmm.
didn't lose oil pressure. When I go to the driver, the first thing I do is look at a speed trace.
Okay. So I guess we're gonna dig in now. Strap in, everybody. So if I have a speed trace, it for
Yep.
those who have not seen it, it is a XY graph, the horizontal being the track distance and the vertical being the speed, velocity, speed. I think speed's technically correct. Um, and then you get a bunch of squiggles, and they usually are ascending for acceleration, descending for deceleration, and then when you're transitioning or turning into a car turn or slowing down, you'll see peaks and I don't know, the top of the peak and the bottom of the peak.
Yeah. So one of the ways that I think I try to help people is across the bottom, left to right. It's imagine you had like one of those surveyor wheels when you see the guy like measuring the road
Mm-hmm.
and you stuck it at start finish and you just started walking and it counts 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot until you get all the way back. That's the distance across the bottom. It's how far you drove along. And then the up and down is at foot one, how fast was I going? 100 miles an hour.
Right.
At foot two, how fast was I going? 102. Right. And if you're accelerating, it goes higher and higher and down. It was just like you had a radar gun at each one of those points and it puts it together.
Mm-hmm.
So then, yeah, like you said, is if we can make some generalities. So, like in general, going throttle to brake, it should be pretty fast, like abrupt. We're not going to coast in. And that makes the graph look like a sawtooth.
Mm-hmm.
It's really sharp where it goes from accelerating to braking. And if it looks big and rounded, then it's something like maybe we coasted, maybe there's something else. And then we can go, okay, well, why did we coast or why did we do that?
Right.
And then the same thing on the bottom is, I like to say it looks more sort of like a hockey stick, that it comes down and then it flattens out a little bit before it goes back up. And that flattening out is the trail braking component, the carrying more momentum into the corner and then accelerating back out of the corner.
So that would be the U shape at the bottom.
Yeah, and then depending, that's a good one. Is we can say a corner looks like a V or a U at the bottom.
Right.
U being usually a faster corner. This weekend I was at NHMS and we ran NASCAR Oval 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big wide U, right? Because you're doing 84 through the middle or something. Versus the next corner, turn 3, is a 34 mile an hour corner, and that thing's a big V.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you drive it like me and you mess it up, and then you turn it into a U and you get something to work on.
So at this point, We're still at the 101, 102 level.
Yep.
This is just a particular lap. You can even get information just by the shape. And usually the fast corners, you're going to want the U-ish shape, and the slow corners can be more V-like, depending on track, depending on car,
Yep.
depending. What about it? Well, before we go to that, is there any other information you get just from a distance versus speed, or speed versus distance? I don't remember which way they call it.
Oh yeah. So depending how steep it is going up or down, right? We can say how fast were you accelerating? Because the steeper it goes up, the faster you're accelerating. So if one spot's much shallower, well, were you maybe at half throttle, not full throttle?
Right.
Right. So we can infer some things there. And then if we're looking at the braking side, the same thing. Were you braking as hard as possible, or were you maybe braking half effort?
Mhm.
Um,
Long
and then the
long shift
transition.
durations you can see.
Oh yeah, you'll see. I drive an old 914, so my shifts aren't near, like anywhere as fast as a new car. So you'll actually see like a step in the data. And then at a place like Watkins Glen, when you go up the S's and it's this big steep hill, um, with my old transmission, I actually lost 2 miles an hour
Hmm.
in the shift. Like the
Hmm.
car slowed down two before I got in the next gear and got to keep going. Um, and then that's sometimes where the art of data comes in, is I go, yeah, you could try to shift it faster, not have that happen, but is it worth it?
Right.
Like we all own our own stuff. So you go like, yeah, there's a problem. I know all about it. I know why it happened, and I'm okay with it. I'll keep it.
Yeah. Is that the biggest problem you have? Maybe not.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got uh, a graph that's going upwards. That's our acceleration. A graph that's going downwards. That's our braking. We've
Yep.
got the curves. We've got the shifting points. We've got the transition from one to the other. You kind of want that to be kind of quick, but you
Yep.
know, sometimes not the quickest. Sometimes, and then you've got track specific things where you go off camber, or you have like a carousel type turn. Things get a little weird.
Yep.
Outliers, but 90% of stuff we're trying to get there. So once you're looking at that, if you see a well, let's go with stuff that you hear on the internet, because it's obviously correct and 100% factually accurate. Uh, if I'm under 60 miles an hour, uh, my the bottoms of my curves should be sharp, and if I'm above 60 miles an hour, they should be U's.
Oh, um, those are some of the generalizations I don't usually like to go for.
I'm with you.
So before I would start to do that on just having a speed trace, if I only have the speed trace, I wouldn't go that route. I'd turn on a bunch of laps, like my 3 or 4 or 5 best laps,
Hmm.
because what you're going to see is a whole bunch of the lap, like 80% is going to overlay really well.
Right.
Um, Almost everybody's good accelerating, right? So down the front straight, that line's going to be like one line because you're really good at going. The corner you have the most trouble with, that corner speed might vary by like 5 miles an hour.
Right.
Maybe it's more. Like, I've had them. Sometimes it's 7, 8, 10, right? Like whatever that number is. But you'll see there's a lot of variance there. To me, that's a spot you have a good example and you kind of have what you usually do. And then you can start drilling into it and go like, okay, well, how do I make this one more consistent and consistently better?
Right. And that's when we start comparing lap to lap.
Yeah, but I would go lap to lap before I just um tried to make these super generalizations like, oh, this corner is 61 miles an hour, so now it has to be a U. But wait a minute, I did it really poorly, and that was 58. So the 58 lap is supposed to be a V,
Yeah.
right? Like
Well,
it's
that's kind of what we're trying to show, is that sometimes the internet may have a opinion that may not be the best way to go.
yeah, and then there's so much information out now, right? Like you
Hmm.
can find really good info on YouTube from stuff. Like I've done a bunch of webinars with AIM and other
Yep,
people. Tom O'Gorman has really awesome track guides.
he does.
I know he's been on your show a bunch, but
Yep.
his track guides are phenomenal, right? Like go on there and watch that and he'll give you the description of what he's doing. And then try to imagine what that means in the data.
Mhm.
So if he goes like, oh, we're going to come in and lift and brake just a little bit and try to carry the speed and get back out, you're like, well, that sounds like a U.
Yep.
And then if it's a corner, that he says we're going to come in here and stand on the brakes and try to get back out really quick, you're like, well, that sounds like a V, right?
Yep.
So you might not have his data, but you can get an idea of what's really right, and it's from a good source.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever had him on, Dion from Blaze.
Dion, yeah. Von Moltke,
Yeah,
yeah.
he has some great stuff out there too, right? And
He
this is a
does.
guy just like Tom that has won these big races, that knows how to do it and knows how to teach it. And what do they say about it? Like how does he describe a corner, and then imagine that how you're going to drive it, and that tells you the data part.
Yeah. I think we've gone past the translating what you should be doing and then thinking what your speed trace is. I think we're probably past the 101 part, but eventually that's a good place to get to because, I've heard of several coaches who have drivers. They say, this is what I want you to do. And they can actually go do that with their feet and their hands.
Oh man. Every time I go out there, I know what I want to do, and then somehow I mess it up.
Well, I didn't say we were those people, but I've heard of these people, it's
I've worked with some people that you'll have like a team's worth of data, and the guy who's usually the fastest will come over and go like, he was faster than me in turn 3, and you go, yeah. And he looks at the data and goes, okay. And then all of a sudden he just goes faster.
yeah. Yeah.
And you go, how did you do that? And he goes, yeah, I had one guy who really did this. I said, like, how did you do that? He goes, well, came in the corner and I thought, how do I get to the throttle sooner? And I did it.
Yep. We just need that one more sentence that he's not saying though. Just that one
But
more.
I've heard him like, that's really what goes on. Like some
Oh, I know.
people
Yeah.
get it, and that's how it works.
Yeah. It's so similar to when you're going to a train crossing and the car in front of you made it, so you can make it, isn't it? It's almost the same.
Sometimes that's what we need, though, right? Like,
Yeah. What
forget
can the car
data.
do?
We need a rabbit,
Yeah. What can the car do? And
right?
having a reference lap, I believe, is the fancy word for it. In your car, if you can get somebody who's good to go out there and at least show what the car can do with their skill level, sometimes you realize that you're not close to the limit there, buddy.
Yeah. And sometimes I think it's a loaded one. So, I'd like to give examples from me because, like, I did it. I know what I was thinking while I did it, and then I have the data to share, and I'm open, my good, the bad, the whatever. I put it out there. This weekend, I did my first session, and the car was sliding everywhere, and I realized, A, I'm not really near the limit, and B, it's sliding because I'm not looking far enough ahead, so I'm reacting to everything too quick.
Mhm. Right.
And I guess the car was over the edge, right? Like I was sliding all over, but it had nothing to do with the limit of the car. It was the driver limit. Like I
Yeah.
was messing up, not the car.
Yep.
And that's one of the ones that's hard, right? Like that doesn't necessarily show up in the data easily.
Yeah. And that's where the next thing that I was thinking we might be adding like into the 103 level is when and how to incorporate video, because sometimes the data doesn't give you everything because you may be slow in that turn because of traffic or yellow flag, and
Yeah.
it gets harder.
That one for me is usually an easy question to ask people. As I say, do you really love spreadsheets, or do you like graphs, or like, do you like pictures and things?
Mhm.
And I'm guessing you're probably like me. Somebody goes a spreadsheet, and I'm like, I have a spreadsheet for everything.
Yes, I do, but I like video too.
Right. But then the data usually makes sense because you kind of have that mathematical thinking. And then I've got two friends, they're artists, like professional artists. The data makes no sense. You show them a video and they get it.
Yep.
So that's usually like my sort of litmus test. I'm like, do you like spreadsheets? And they're like, never use them, hate them. I'm like, you need a video solution.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all how that person works, right? Like it's trying to figure out whether it's data or video or descriptions, like how do we share that info and get it through? Sometimes the best part about data is I say it's just a conversation starter. Like we share our data, and it doesn't even matter if it's the same car, not even in the same close to capabilities. You'll see something in a corner and you go, hey, we're further than I thought we were. We're closer than we thought we were. How do you drive that? And all of a sudden, it just started that conversation that you'll say, you did this. And I say, I did this. And then, did you ever notice this reference? That, it
Right.
just builds that conversation. And the data just started it. It has nothing to do. And then all of a sudden, you realize we're all driving better and faster and everything.
Hmm. So, so we've got, I guess at the first level, we've got the original lap. And let's say it's just for round numbers, it's a minute 30 because,
Yep.
whatever. So the next step we do is we do the speed trace and we do distance versus speed. We can analyze that to a point, and we new people will analyze it to a point that's less than you would be able to get out of the same, but there's still value there.
Hmm.
And then we start comparing our lap variation.
Yep.
And with that, I think the thing that I've been looking for is where we do mostly endurance racing. So we also have a team component. So we may have one data stream with 260 laps and 4 drivers. So
Hmm.
I start looking at, you know, variation between drivers or variation within the same driver to look at where there may be some fruit to make things either more consistent or faster.
Yep. This thing's always cool because you also get to look at, is somebody driving, and it's hard with just the speed trace, but as you get into it, are they maybe driving in a way that works the car harder?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so say two people run the same lap time, but somebody gets better fuel mileage, or
Right.
they get better, the
Tire.
tires aren't worn out, the brakes
Yep.
aren't worn out.
Yep.
Then you're like, well, hey, what are they doing different, right? And you get to start drilling in.
Yep. So I haven't gotten into equipment on purpose because that's overly, I think it's going to overly complicate and maybe distract from the discussion. So I wanted to stay kind of data related. We'll do some equipment before we're done for sure. Because, I can't do this in my head and remember, on lap 62, I was doing 64 miles an hour when I went past the
Right?
four board. Um, what would you recommend for doing that? Would you just overlay several laps and look for where there's a spread, or would you do some type of analysis of the math data functions?
No, for most of the people, it's just overlay the laps. Look at those speed traces and see where they're the same or they're different, and then start the question of why.
Hmm.
And then why turns into how. So somebody was faster in one corner by 3 miles an hour, and you go, geez, how did you do that? And he
Right.
goes, oh, I just thought about getting back to the throttle. And you're like, okay, well, what was your brake marker? Like, where did you carry the throttle to? Where'd you hit the brake? When did you come off the brake? Where did you turn in? Where was your apex? What were you looking at towards the track out? Like, did you just commit to, is it like a Miata throttle trace that you just went from 0 to 50% and then 100? Or was it a big V8 throttle trace that you tipped in and went like 10%, 11, 12, and really slow, right?
Right.
Like it starts to build that, and then you get to compare notes and ideas and see what it did, and then you get to go try it. Like the really fun part.
Hmm. Absolutely the fun part. So I guess that gets to the point of where we can use the data for the good of an individual driver or the good of a team. Also, in some aspects, the car development and the car development program that you have, because you can see if what you're doing is doing anything.
Definitely. You get to see, say, um, the event I was at, I've an old 914. There's no arrow in the thing, and I'm out there
Hmm.
with a whole bunch of Miatas that have the big splitter on the front, and the wing, and all the stuff.
Thank
So
you,
you get to
Johnny
look at it
C.
and go like, I added all this stuff. Did it make me faster? Because maybe it made you slower down the straightaway, but it made you faster in that big sweeping corner.
Hmm.
Um, Same thing, tires. Like, Did it make my corner speed go up?
Right. Right. And, sometimes, just I just came from a grid life event, so I've got grid life rules in my head.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to do the calculation. Yes, I'm faster, but my penalty is X and my speed turned out to be Y. Is Y bigger than X or is Y less than X? And perhaps I need to
Right.
change.
Yeah. And then, when you do a program like that and then you have weight requirements, right?
Hmm.
But that's the perfect one. Like if you're on a day that you can test stuff, put the weight in, take the weight out, like make those changes and see which one. And maybe one way doesn't fit your driving style, right?
Yeah,
Like
you're more
I'm a
comfortable.
bigger hammer guy. So if you ask me to start being a finesse driver, it's probably not going to work really well.
Yeah, or
And
you like the way a car feels this way, and not like you like a pointy car or an oversteer car, or you like a understeer car, whichever one fits you.
exactly. And maybe it's one that you change whatever those setup things or the wings and whatever, and you don't have the balance that you need to be the best, then it's not going to work for you, right? And that's
Hmm.
but you get to see it in the data and your notes and your feelings with it and try to see what's best for you and the team, right?
Yep, because that's another complicating factor is that everybody doesn't drive the same on the same team in the same
Right.
car.
Yeah. And one guy will get out and say it pushes like a pig, and the other person says they can't keep the rear end on the track.
Hmm. Yep.
And you're like, you guys drove, it was literally a pit stop apart, 3 minutes apart in the same track. How is the car this different?
Yep. And one person comes in with nice warm tires, and one person comes in with four flat spotted Fred Flintstone tires, and
Right.
then we have a conversation. But that's different. That's probably not in the data, but it might be. You never know.
It just depends on how much data. Like, my car, I've got everything on it. So if you came in my car and the brakes are smoking, I can tell you how hot the brakes were and why they were that hot and when you did it. And yeah. Um, but that's all. It's all how deep you want and then what you want to investigate.
Yep. So I guess the first stage we've done is the speed trace, the speed
Yep.
versus distance. If somebody's you get this is where the why happens in my mind. This is where the do I go for more data components and analysis or do I go for more toys? And being an engineer, I like toys, but I also like data. So I get stuck saying yes to both. What would you recommend to move on from the next increment?
So almost every system anymore, and I can't think of one that doesn't have it, gives you G-forces.
Hmm.
That is a tremendous measure because it's the same idea as the speed trace, but it gives you whether it's the fuzzy dice analogy, right? Like you hit the
Hmm.
brakes and it makes G-force, puts you in the belts. You
Yep.
hit the gas, it pushes you in the seat. You turn to the right, you jam on the left side of the car, same way. Um, and that gives you so much great info because just cornering wise, we can say, well, did you build the same cornering force in every corner? Because the car is always going to be pretty similar, pending off camber, something weird. Um, so did I drive with the same intensity in every corner? Or is there a corner I don't get as many G's and then why?
Right.
Um, maybe it's just not that sharp of a corner, right? It's a kink, not a corner. Um, and then the longitudinal, so front to back G forces are a really great way to look at braking forces because it's when it goes negative, it really matches your brake trace.
Hmm.
Because you hit the brakes hard, right? And you get lots of G forces that throws you in the belts.
Right.
So that's a great way to look at your braking and are you braking right?
Or the
Another
team
internet.
is the team breaking consistently. That's where I see a big difference between drivers is in the latchy longy.
Yeah. Braking is probably the spot that you can, I shouldn't say that. Braking is the spot almost everybody can get the most out of.
Hmm.
And I'd say almost everybody has the most room there. Like if you gave me 10 drivers and just said, Matt, you have to tell them some generalized, super general thing, I'd say brake better.
Hmm.
That is the first biggest crux of almost everybody.
Yeah, everybody we've asked on the podcast, what do you need to work on?
Yep.
No one has said I need to be able to push the gas pedal faster. No one has said my left turns aren't quite up to snuff, but my right turns, I'm dynamite. They all say braking.
Yeah. And it didn't make sense to me. It was my first instructor, and people have more trouble with right-hand turns usually than left
Hmm.
because you can't tell where that edge of the car is. Like it throws you off.
I found that out on the skid pad.
Yeah.
I was able to go counterclockwise much better than I could counterclockwise.
Yeah. And then for car placement, do you ever use my I can't be the only person that does this. The construction zone thing.
Mm-mm.
I'm assuming everywhere in the country, Californians have it even better because they have the reflector always built in the highway.
Yes.
When you when they're doing the road construction, like the summer season here,
Hmm.
and they have those little stick-on
Reflectors.
reflectors that stick up, and then you hit them and they make that cool noise that you know you
Hmm.
hit them.
Hmm.
So I always try to see, like, if I'm driving at night and there's nobody around, I see how many in a row I can hit.
Right.
And
Yeah,
it's like great, like you have a kinesthetic feedback because you get to feel that you hit it, you get to hear the noise, like the whole thing. And my record's like 230 or something.
yeah. Well, unfortunately, where we live in Pennsylvania, they don't tend to take care of the roads, so we just choose which pothole we're going to hit and which pothole we're not going to hit. And
280 potholes in a row would be like a totally different sort of problem.
it's it's doable on some of these roads. I swear,
Right.
it's craziness. But okay, so we do. All right, so let's describe this. It's gonna lat G, long G. That's gonna be the people call it the friction circle,
Yep.
essentially, and that's gonna be kind of a squashed ball, and left and right is your G's to the sides, and front to back is accelerating and decelerating.
Yep.
So if I show that graph to my beautiful bride, she looks at it and says there's a whole bunch of dots and doesn't get anything out of it.
Yep.
So,
And that's when sometimes, like, as we start to get more into data, um, and it bleeds into the hardware conversation a little bit, is
mhm,
some systems they just give you a report and you have to figure everything out. And other ones will give you an interpretation, maybe without the data, and just give you a new goal or something.
okay.
Um, and that sometimes, depending on the person, how they think and what they want to put into their data, tells them what's best. Um, a really neat device that you guys have, and I know Andrew's Reigns has been on with you guys a whole bunch from Apex Pro.
Hmm.
They did something really cool that you never actually have to look at the data that the device makes because
Nope.
it gives you a measure as you're driving real time. So maybe for someone like your wife that goes, I don't want to know what all those dots mean. I don't like that's great. And I'm happy you enjoy it. It's not for me, but she might see the lights in the car and go, that's awesome. That's the feedback I need.
She does like the lights of the Apex Pro. It makes her
Yeah.
happy. She's a two color girl. She likes to know the total scale and then what she's used of the scale. That makes her happy.
Yep. Yeah. And for a lot of people, it's what how your brain works and how you like to take in information, and then real time what you can take. So to me, I didn't find the lights as helpful as I find predictive time.
Hmm. That's
Or
a whole.
on my aim dash, I was talking to someone that I actually have like no real car information on my dash when I'm driving. I have mostly what I use is a shift light and it's set to predictive time. So each light is a tenth, and
Off of your prior record, I guess.
off my reference lap,
Hmm.
like whether I'm ahead or not. And then I just want to know, like, when I tried to brake later, I'll see it go more green, but that means I overcharged the corner, my exit's bad, and I see less green and red, right? Like, to me, that's the ultimate one because I can correlate what that lap time difference was with what I felt.
Right.
It was sort of a breakthrough in my driving for me that using that predictive time, I was able to like calibrate myself to how bad a slide was.
Right.
So if the car understeered, I could go like, oh, that was a 2/10 understeer, and then look at the data and go like, yeah, that was 2/10. And then try to catch it sooner and go, oh, that 2/10 slide is now a 1/10, and now it's a half a tenth, and get that. But again, it's what you like as you're driving.
Yeah, and it's different from driver to driver, person to person, for sure.
Yeah, and going back to the G-forces, some people, I've seen cars where, in the video, people go back and they look at the key ring, right? And they have like a key ring on it, and they look at how far it swung, and they go, I'm driving really well when the key ring is straight to the side.
Right.
It's what you have and what works for you.
I saw one guy, he had a half-filled Coke bottle on his dash.
Yeah. Yeah.
Works for him.
There's a guy in Trans Am with a hula dancer
Mm-hmm.
on his dash, and I think he goes by how fast he's hulaing.
Doesn't have to be fancy.
Right. It's, use the tools that you have. Like for some people, it's really deep, and some it's the basics. Like a Coke bottle with it half filled would work great.
Yeah. So we ventured off. Surprisingly, a podcast digressed into a side discussion, but we ventured off from the Latchi Longi. When you're looking at the squashed oval, the friction circle, I was always told you want to have things as far out on towards the edges of the periphery as you can, and as few points on the inside where you're not really pushing the car. Obviously, on the pit lane and going out lap, you'll have less. But is that kind of generically what you're trying to do, is push the circle to take up more area?
Yeah. So if we think of it as a left to right, we have G forces to the sides, like how hard we're turning, and then up is braking, down is throttle. We want to corner as hard as we can. That's the most G force. So it's going to be the furthest out.
Mm-hmm.
And then there'll be a spot in the middle where we're accelerating down the straights, right? Like the car doesn't accelerate as hard. We're going straight. There's no G forces.
I keep pushing. It doesn't go any faster.
I get a lot of fun made of me being in a 914 that it doesn't accelerate as fast as some other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the car, right? That's going to be unique to each one. And then downwards, we want to have braking pretty far down, right? Like
right.
With tires now, it might be close to a little bit more. Well, it'll be equal to a little bit more than what we can corner. So say we corner at 1G, which is a pretty good cornering with, good tires and a good car. We might be able to brake at 1.2.
Right.
And then it's going to be pretty round in between those. It's like a circle. And then physics, the car can't accelerate as hard as it brakes. We just don't have that much power. Nothing we get to drive, right? Like an F1 car, I bet could be close.
Yeah, dragster probably can do a little bit.
Dragster, not to get anyone in trouble, I've seen dragster data. So like your top fuel dragster accelerates double what it brakes.
I think that's by choice.
Yes. Right. The motor's a little bit bigger than the brakes.
Tiny bit. I grew up near Englishtown when it was a racetrack, and
yeah,
I keep trying to get Vicky to go to a drag race with me so she can see that they can tear those engines apart and put them back together. So when we have a problem at the track, I want to know there's no excuses. I mean, this is what I expect.
No, you got to hit Reading. Yeah,
we will.
But yeah, so then we accelerate as much as we can. But for your normal car, it's going to accelerate at 0.3, 0.4 of a G. If you're lucky and you have a new GT4 or something, maybe you get a half G. Yeah. But a half G is a fast car.
Mm-hmm.
And then that one sort of circles over, but it's not really all the way around because it's not all the way up.
Right.
And that top part's usually easy for drivers because that's I had a really great skip barber instructor, a guy named Phil Lombardi. And he told me, it was when I first started driving, and Phil said, he goes, there's only 3 things to go fast on a racetrack. And he goes, you got to drive the line, exit speed. And he goes, the third one's hard and scary. And he goes, that's entry speed. And he goes, but I can teach anyone to drive in the right spot and to hit the gas when they hit the apex.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us are pretty good at that point, and we can make the sides and the top pretty good. It's rounding out the bottom that's really hard.
Yeah. So you got to something I was going to cover later, but the data can be used to settle disagreements, as in where to get the throttle. Like, do I get the throttle before the apex or the after the apex or right at the apex? Or what's the best? Or having pit race on my mind because I got 3 straight races there. Do I hit the gas going into turn 5, in between turn 5 and 6? Depending on the car, if you don't hit it before 6, you may end up timing your lap timer with a sand dial because you may be going uphill to 7 for about an hour if you do it
Right.
wrong. So that's one of the things that we try to do. And is that something you see, I guess, decided upon by racers and teams and different series?
Oh yeah. So that sort of brings us into the next sensors, right? So
Yep.
I started out as a driver. So I always think of data first is what does a driver do? And when I'm driving, I have a gas pedal, a brake pedal, and a steering wheel. Those are the things that I get to act upon to change the car to go faster. So if we say longitudinal G for braking in a very, very basic system, if all we have is speed and G forces, that's where we go. As soon as we can add more stuff and we add in a throttle pedal position,
Mhm.
um, and on new cars, that's included so often, it's really easy to get. That gives us a lot of info because now we know where the car's slowing down from the longitudinal G, and we see how it's slowing and where and how aggressive and all that. And then with throttle position, we can see what the driver's doing. And that sensor tells us a lot. It tells us, it gives us a vision into the driver's mind in their confidence.
Right.
Because if you see them go right to a lot of throttle, we know they were comfortable. If you see them hesitating and on and off and on and off and on and off, we know they're not comfortable most likely.
Mhm.
Um, so it tells us a lot. And then we can look at when you did that, right? Like, was it early in the corner, late in the corner? And then if it was early, is it because that's what that corner needs, or is it because you overslowed?
Right.
And that's where having a teammate's data becomes so great because you go like, well, like we were doing pretty well in our class and everything else. The fastest driver's back to the throttle before the apex. Maybe that's how we have to drive it.
Right.
Um,
Or at least test it and try it.
right. Versus you're like, hey, I'm the slowest guy in the team in this corner, and I'm the only one that's on the throttle early. And oh, by the way, I'm the one that complains the car pushes and it has no front grip. Like, there's our sign, right? Like we started to get it.
Driver induced issues. I have a I have a section on that later, but we'll talk about that. I cannot set up a car to master all the things that you could possibly do wrong to the car. So we have to meet
Well,
in the middle.
to go back to the speed chase, right? I didn't work with him, but there was a coach I worked around a whole bunch, wouldn't let the team make a change to the car until the driver was consistent.
True.
Because he said, how do we know what we're going to change? Like, if you can't do the same thing every time, we can't expect the car to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So if sometimes you're on the brake, sometimes you're on the gas, sometimes it turns, sometimes it won't, sometimes it's sliding, sometimes it's not. You're like, well, this is you, not the car,
Hmm.
right? The car's just a tool that's doing what we tell it.
Hopefully, sometimes.
And we've all been in that evil car. Like, what was the one? I was in a car once and the bushings in the rear were worn out.
Yep.
So it had like dynamic toe and camber.
We've
That
we've
car was evil.
we have driven said car and it was dynamic depending on left or right and how much G-force and it would randomly change. It was so much fun.
Here's one I will totally admit. Did you ever make the mistake on your corner bouncing to put like a whole bunch of cross in it?
Hmm.
And then that's a weird car too, right?
It
Like
is.
all of a sudden it rolls over and you're like, look, I'm not the best, but I don't stink this bad. Like, what the heck?
Yeah. We
Yeah.
didn't do it on purpose, but when we finally figured out how to measure it, we found out that we had gifted ourselves a pleasurable drive. Let's go with that.
I did the same thing. And the next question, just this is totally off tangent. Were you scared to start changing it without scales, or did you just start cranking on the shocks?
Uh, we've only done it a couple times, and we've always had scales. So TBD
Okay.
at this point. Is it the way I describe it is for the first five five-ish years that we were driving as a team, we were all learning,
Yep.
and we treated the car like it was a black box, and everything that was wrong was driver. So we didn't do anything to the car because we knew the problem root cause was us.
Yep.
Now, that was not 100% accurate, and we had done some stuff to ourselves that did not help us along the way, but we didn't know any better, so that's what we did.
Got it. So yeah, when I did it, I'm like, something's really messed up. And then I'm like, I think I know what I did. So I just started cranking on it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And I'm like,
sometimes you can't, it's not right, so you got to give it a shot.
messed up is messed up, right? Like you got to change something.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Just remember when your gas is leaking out of the car, it's not the gas cap. That's all I'm gonna say. That's a whole nother story. So we've got lap time, then we've got speed trace,
Yep.
speed versus distance,
G-forces.
then we've got lat G long G, speed forces, friction circle, all the same.
Yep.
Is this where we start talking about more data streams or more toys and measurements?
Um, what would you say the difference? Because I
Well,
would consider those sort of the same.
I can get data from things that are already within, like this. Let's go with the AIM Solo 2 or an AIM Dash.
Mhm.
There's data that it collects and analyzes differently using Race
Gotcha.
Studio or whatever. And then there's, do I want to have tire pressure gauge? Do I want to have tire temperature? Do I want to have shock speed? Things like
Um,
that. So I can get crazy. There's stuff I don't even know about that I really want, but I want it.
yeah. So that's a little bit of a loaded question, right? So it's case by case dependent. So typically I'd say if you asked me and you said, hey, in general, what do you want? I'd say speed and G-forces, GPS information,
Hmm.
throttle, brake, steering, right?
Okay. So brake would
And
be position or force or
brake pressure. So usually it's
pressure. Okay.
you put a pressure sensor in line. Typically it's on the front. If you have dual masters, it would be front and rear,
Hmm.
and it tells you how hard you hit the brake pedal.
Okay.
Steering position, left, right, and everything else. And then from there, usually I go vehicle health. So I want oil pressure, oil temp, water temp. If you have a car that is known for transmission problems, I'd say transmission temperature,
Hmm.
rear end temperature, that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, then, geez, where do you go?
Well,
I'd
with
say,
with that, you could actually plot that versus laps, so you could see what your diff. Let's say you
yeah,
have you could see your rear diff between lap. Let's say your car's warmed up by lap 5 or so, and you could see it 250 laps later. Did it move? Because nobody's going to notice as a driver.
right.
I mean,
And is this thing, you can see a lot with it, right? So is it like going nuclear and it just never stops getting hotter and hotter?
hmm.
But maybe it never stops getting hotter and hotter, but it's only ever 110 degrees,
Right.
making up numbers.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter, right? Like we don't care.
Right.
All of a sudden we find out the rear end is 300 degrees and we're like, geez, this isn't going to make it. Like we
Yep.
got to refurb this transmission before we go out.
Or it better be last lap because we don't have many more.
Right. It brings up another interesting story, but so I usually go there, engine health, vehicle health. Then, I'd say I try to be practical, give people the advice I wish people gave me. If you're racing Spec Miata, I'm probably not going to suggest shock sensors
Right.
because you can't do anything with it.
Hmm. It's a knob you can't turn.
Yeah, and depending on your car, even in your skill set and your budget and everything else, shock sensors to me are super cool. I learned so much having them on my car. For a lot of people, they're no good because they don't have a shock guy they're going to work with, or they can't change the shocks or whatever it is. So it's kind of wasted money.
Mhm.
Um, a sensor that I found incredibly valuable is tire pressures. So we can put tire pressures into a data system, and that's something everyone can work with because we all have a gauge.
Right.
So, and then if you guys are endurance racing, how long did it take the tires to come up to pressure?
Yep.
And then if there's a yellow flag, how fast do they lose it?
Yep.
And then you don't lose it back to starting. So how fast did it take them to come back?
Right.
Where did the car make the most grip? Where was the highest G forces? Um, so you can start to work through all those sorts of things as the next vehicle performance. So I think that one in the systems now sell for the same price as a cheaper than a really good tire gauge. So it's accessible to everyone. You have a tire gauge, you can act on that right away. I do a lot with infrared tire temps. Really neat stuff, right? Like we can learn so much about what your tire is doing in the middle of the corner. I
Right.
have it on my 914. The rear temperatures in the middle of a corner, the inside goes totally cold. It like picks it off the track. And you know what I can do about that?
Not a lot with your car.
Nothing. So it's like it's great information, but you can't do a lot with it. So it's one that maybe it doesn't matter. Like you can get the basic alignment stuff started, but then you're like, am I going to cut the back of the car off and redo it?
Yeah.
Like, no, I live with bad temperatures and it wears the outside a little bit, and that's life.
Yep. It,
Um,
it only matters if you can affect it or control it.
right. And then some things I'm a big proponent of taking the AIM makes a really value priced infrared sensor. I shoot it at the track. And it puts it in my data because then I don't have to try to remember it. I don't have to write it down. It makes my day at the track more fun
Mm-hmm.
because it's like one less thing I have to do. And a year later, I'm not trying to guess like, was it super sunny and the track was hot? Was it cold?
Right.
That sort of thing. And then sometimes it gives you more context. And I guess now we're like on data 501, but
Yeah, I know.
um,
Well, we're not going to get too deep into this one because we're going to lose
yeah,
people.
but it gives you more context. So the more sensors you have, the more context you have, right? So if we wonder why a speed trace is slowing down more, it's decelerating in a certain way, we start to peel the layer. We go, well, what were the G forces and why were they that way? And when you get used to it, like I can look at a speed trace and imagine what the G force trace look like. And then you go like, well, what did the driver do in the brakes? And then you can look at it. And then you just get to keep peeling.
Mhm.
If you have shock sensors, you go, well, what did the shocks do? What did the right? And what were the tire temps? And you keep digging and digging. But the answer still really comes back to that speed trace. Roger at AIM calls it the money channel
Right.
because the higher you can make that thing in, the more prize money you win.
Yep. I think the thing that we didn't touch on that I had for later, but you just brought it up. This is something that's a process. It's not, you know, something you grew up learning in kindergarten was how to interpret a speed trace. You, Matt, would get a whole lot more out of a speed trace than Bill, who would get a whole lot more out of a speed trace than somebody who's never looked at one. And as you look at them, you get better at them and
Yep.
better at interpreting them. And the interpretation is really where working with someone like you comes into play.
Yes. And even to the point that I tell people, I'm like, if the only thing you have access to is a phone app, use it on a track that you know, because when you start to look at that speed trace, it has context. You understand it because you know how fast the front straight is and how slow turn one is. Um, if I look at somebody's data from Eagles Canyon, I've never been there. I don't know that track at all.
Right.
It's very hard for me to interpret a whole bunch from it versus if you show me data trace from Watkins Glen, you don't even have to tell me that speed trace is the Glen. I can figure it out.
Right. And that's not something you were good at initially, but with experience, you've built up
It's
that
like you
the
can't see
reps.
it. Holy cow. I have 50 books on data, and I've probably done, oh man, I don't know how many seminars on it, and late nights and early mornings, and emailing with a friend or talking at the track, or track walks. Like I'll take a screenshot of the data
Hmm.
and then kind of look at it and like, okay, this is turn, 3, and look at that. It was a, you know, 37-mile-an-hour corner. Like, okay, well, where is the slow spot here? I think it's right here, right? And then just building that context and understanding, and then looking at your lap time and going like, geez, that was a better lap and it was easy. What was different here? And you're like, oh, I was faster here. Like, how did I do that? Right. And make your notes.
Right. But no one's like the best time to start looking at the data is today because
Yeah.
you're not going to get better at it tomorrow. Like Matt 10 years ago doesn't interpret nearly as well as Matt does today when looking at even just a simple speed trace. You get more out of it because you've got more reps.
I fully admit. So when we first started using data on that Formula Continental, the driver came in and he'd go, I think we over revved it. And you'd look at the data and go, yep. And then you'd move on. Like that was data analysis to us then.
Right.
Now the driver comes in and he says he over revs it. I was like, well, is this on a missed gear or an upshift? How many feet did it go? Is it a spot where it's like it's totally different. Yeah. But it's also, I've been with top level IMSA drivers doing a debrief, listening to them, and it all comes back to speed and what the tire's doing.
Yep.
Right? Like you can go super, super deep, but it's the same. The best drivers have the same conversation with the same topics as you did. It's just at a different level. And it's not even like they understand it better. They're just more detailed.
More descriptive, more feel.
Yeah, and I'd say like where you might have 3 references from the, say, a good driver, right? You have like 3 reference points, 4 reference points between turn in and apex.
Mm-hmm.
They might have 50, and they might be able. This was wild. I listened to them on the, if you know Watkins Glen, it's the outer loop.
Yep.
From when they turned into the outer loop, exiting the bus stop, to the flag station apex. I swear they had a description for what the car did every single rollout of the tire, every 6 feet.
Right.
And that's the level of detail they give you. And I'm like, hanging on for dear life, screaming. They're like, what did it do? And I'm like, I got the apex, right?
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky if we say on turn in it was loose and mid it pushed a little bit and at exit it was fine. If we get to there, and they're sitting there going, well,
right. And then I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this, and I'm like, so now we're on turn 10. They're like, oh no, I just turned in. I'm like,
I haven't gotten to the apex yet. Hold on.
You're right. But it's, when's the time to try to improve that? Like now. Like I go to bed driving laps in my head and just thinking of those things and trying to do it. And then I go to the track and I look at them, and every time you do this, you learn something.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we probably hit a point where we've dug the hole deep enough that people can kind of get oriented a little bit and start to think about how this could help them and where this might be applicable for them. But most of the seasons around here at least are wrapping up. So maybe this is a good spot to go for part 1 conclusion.
Yeah.
So,
and I'd say, even if it's the end of the year, is try something. Like if you have access to, a lot of clubs and groups now have a data program. If you have the ability to borrow a system, if your buddy has a Solo or a Apex Pro or something, like bum it off them. Like, hey, can I use that for a session? And try to get a little bit of data. And then you have all winter to start looking at it and see, is it for you? Data for some people, they're just not into it, right? It's not their version of fun.
Right.
So maybe you look at it and you go, this isn't something I want. But if it is, it gives you a chance to start learning and start doing things.
Yeah. And if you want to have probably more data than you'll ever start out with, especially in the beginning. If you ever look into the sim racing data, it's got tons of data, like way more
Oh
data.
man. So if you're like me and you hit the winner and I'm really bummed out because I'm trying to figure out if there's any dates I can still make in the north.
Hmm.
But it's, I'm like, well, it could be snowing at Watkins Glen next weekend, but it might be 80. I'm like, do I try to make it? And then life demands and everything else. But you can go on the sim, and if you're into iRacing or Assetto Corsa or R Factor, those programs all put out giant data files that have so much information in them that you can't afford to put in a car. So if you're an iRacing person, turn on the telemetry, get some data. You can look at it in AIM or Motec, or there's a whole bunch of online ones that you can do.
Right.
Um, Grab that data and check it out. Like get started with it.
Yeah. It's not a bad place to practice because it's
Yeah.
collected for free and it didn't cost you anything.
And what's cool, I've sim raced with a bunch of guys. They're actually racing right now. I think I can't remember. It's F4 somewhere. I popped up in my calendar. Um, But they go and then everybody takes their data at the end. They stick it in a Google Drive. And then right after the race, like we race for an hour, and then there's another half hour that everybody sticks their info in. And then somebody shares their screen and they put it all up in Race Studio 3 and we analyze everyone's data.
Hmm.
And then we had that conversation like, geez, you were faster in turn, whatever. How did you do it? And then they're like telling us. And then iRacing has the great video replay, so you can save it. So when we go into the data, then we hop back in iRacing and we start to look at how someone was faster. Um, it's cool because you get all the camera angles, so you can see was your car placement good,
Yep.
right? Like all that stuff. So it's a great way to do things.
Hmm.
And the guys I do it with are budget from I spent a couple grand on my sim rig. One guy is into E46 BMW. He took all the measurements and made a plywood cockpit so it matches his car.
The man has too much time.
Retired,
Okay.
right?
There it is.
But I mean, how cool is that? Like it was like plywood that he had around and you like trim the shapes, you get the measurements to the footwell's right and the
Hmm.
steering wheel's in the right spot. And I'm like, how cool is that?
Yep. Next thing you know, he's going to have that thing articulating around his basement.
Oh man, right? I can only imagine.
Don't let him listen to this part of the podcast.
Right. Bjorn, cover your ears.
That's right. So next time we'll dig in a little bit more. We'll get into some of the sensors. We'll talk about some of the issues I have with Race Studio, but we'll talk about that.
Definitely.
I need help. And I was thinking maybe we could get into looking at potential equipment choices, like why would you get a solo versus a solo DL versus a dash versus because the worst thing is when you buy it and you find out it's not what you wanted or what you thought it was,
Yeah.
and that gets
Um,
expensive and
ex
frustrating.
yeah, expensive, frustrating. It takes all the fun out of it. And it's yeah, that's a great topic. And there's so many ways to kind of dig through it and get what you want and good resources. Like I'm an AIM guy. Um, there's so many good AIM resources, but if there's another system you want, there's great resources for it. And I definitely have some advice on how to make those choices better or worse.
Hmm.
Um,
Depends
but
on what
yeah,
you want,
those are
really.
great topics.
Depends on what you want.
It depends what you want. And I'd also say you want someone that's gonna support your journey with it. Um,
Indeed.
that's what, like Apex Pro is a great Facebook group. Andrew supports people. He's an awesome teacher. He's really great there. Um, there's it's not really picking on like TrackMate was a great system in the day, right?
Hmm.
But they've been out of business for 7, 8 years.
Yeah, it was right when we started. They were getting out.
Yeah, so if you have a problem, you're like trying to find someone who still remembers how it works, who,
Hmm.
somebody I saw the other day, they're looking for a cable, right? And then you're counting on somebody to like root through their old stuff, that maybe they have a cable, that maybe they can do this, and you're like, hard system for somebody to get going with right now.
Yeah.
Um, or a system a lot of us probably won't use is like Cosworth, right? Super, super powerful, used in all the Indy cars, top level racing. As an amateur, good luck.
Hmm. Yeah.
Really hard for you to get the support you need.
Yeah. And sometimes really hard for you to find the budget.
Yeah, but then there's some people that specialize in Cosworth that work with, a lot of them are in Porsche Cup cars now.
Hmm.
That's what it comes with from the factory. There's some guys out there that really specialize in helping Cup car amateurs that
Right.
will do everything you need, that you can actually get great support from them, not necessarily Cosworth, right? And
Right.
then
Right.
um so it's sort of doing that extra research and making sure it's going to be a great system for you.
Yep.
But that's a great topic and question, and it almost makes you wish this was like a radio show and you get people call in.
Well, luckily, we have an email that they can email us if they have any questions, especially because, it's not too early to start thinking about Christmas.
Right? I
Every,
would love for episode 2 to have a ton of questions from people. That'd be killer.
that would GarageHeroesInTraining@gmail.com. Or you can get with Matt. We'll work together. We'll get this. We'll get an episode you guys want to listen to. It'll be fun.
Yeah, and hopefully it came through. I love race cars. I love data. I love talking about the two of them. I love all of it. So whatever it is, I am completely game.
It'll be fun. So, Matt, I can't imagine anybody having listened to this, especially to this far, and not want to follow you and see what's going on. Best ways to keep up with you and keep up to date with this particular area.
Yeah, so I'm not always the best on Instagram. I try to do my best, keep it going and updated and everything, but Trail Break Matt there. I've been making a lot of YouTube videos that are a little bit aim focused, but also with a good data focus in them. So while I might show you what button to click and aim, the idea of what I'm doing applies to every speed trace or something. Um, and that's under Trail Break Data.
Yep.
And then luckily with a name like Matt Romanowski, there's not a lot of other people with that name.
Not
So
at
you
all.
can Google like Matt Romanowski and you'll find me in a lot of spots.
That's right. And you do some AIM channel stuff as well. I've seen you on there pop on.
Yeah, the AIM guys are great. I've done a bunch of webinars with them. And those are kind of a longer format one that they're usually about an hour.
Mhm.
Those are really cool because while we're using Race Studio 3, there's a lot of them that are just about looking at a speed trace.
Yep.
Like what can we do with the speed trace? What can we do with a split times report? AIM split report looks one way, but splits are splits. And
Yep.
then how we dig into that, it's just a different way that you get into it, right? Like if somebody shows you how to use Microsoft Word or Google Docs, the idea is the same.
Mhm. And if you are thinking about getting this, or you are thinking about somebody getting this for you, or if you're thinking about getting this for yourself for them and just putting it under the tree and wrapping it and say, oh, you did a great job. Uh, Matt's a great resource to talk about what you want versus what your budget is, and trying to make the best out of it, and make sure you're the happiest happy.
Yeah, and again, I always try to treat people how I wanted to be treated. Like I can remember um when I got into cars and I had my own, you really appreciate the person that goes like, "Hey, don't buy whatever because you're going to end up replacing it and buying it twice." Like
Right.
do this in the stages and this is the thing. I try to give people that advice.
Yep.
So if you have a crazy race car, I'm not going to tell you to buy the Solo first because it's not going to do the next steps that you want. Um, so I try to lay out the progression of what you'll want and kind of how to go. And also in what you want, like yeah, side story. It was a guy, a really great guy that we used to drive with a bunch, and he never had any data. Like that wasn't his version of fun. And I saw him at Tremblant, and he came in, drove a session, went to the grocery store, came back with everything. It's not he didn't make a sandwich. He carefully crafted I don't know, whatever the name for high-end sandwich is, and assembled this beautiful sandwich, ate, took a nap, left, had dinner with his friends, and that was his version of a fun day at the racetrack.
Made him happy.
He loved it, and he was never a guy. He came over to me one time and said, "Hey, everybody has this data stuff. Should I get it?" And I'm like, "Well, Jay, is this something you want to do, or is this you just want to come here and drive?" He goes, "I just want to come and drive." So I said, "Well, it's not for you. Like, you want to borrow one? I'll let you borrow one, but it's not what you want." And he goes, "Okay," and he never asked about it again.
Many people like that, but
Yeah,
you
and
know,
there's nothing wrong with it, right? Like, it's this is fun, and it's whatever makes it fun.
yeah, swim as deep as you want. Don't do it because you have to. Do it because you like it.
Yeah, maybe you just like to hang out on the float.
Exactly.
You never even get in the water. That's cool too.
Well, with that, sir, I'm going to thank you for coming on the podcast. I'm going to apologize since now we can communicate to each other for some of my questions, but I've got some how do I put this? The system manufacturers, not just AIM, all of them, make it seem like you know their product line so you can tell which one does what, like, but just by the numbers in MXL, whatever. I can't get through it. So I am going to pester you and say, this is what I think I want. And then you're going to tell me, no, this is really what you want. And then we're going to talk about putting it into my Spec E46 car. So Miss
I
Vicky,
love it.
thank you for Christmas. It's a wonderful, wonderful idea. She just doesn't know it
Right.
yet. So thank you, Matt. It was great.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. This is a ton of fun. I can't wait to do it again.
Don't do that. You might get your wish faster than you can. Now, welcome to the garage. No. Part two. We'll get you soon, Matt. Thank you.
You're welcome.